The badge reader blinked red, and the little screen above it said Ox Destiny in gray letters I'd never once seen there in 19 years. I stood in the loading dock entrance of Hartwell Precision Castings at 6:12 on a Tuesday morning in February, my travel mug still warm in my hand, and I watched the door that I'd walked through more than 4,000 times stay shut. Behind the glass, I could see Donna at the front desk. She saw me too. And then she did the thing that told me everything before anyone said a single word to me. She looked away. My name is Walt Brennick. I'm 58 years old, and I run the foundry floor at a metals company in Erie, Pennsylvania, that makes the alloy castings nobody thinks about until a wind turbine or a Navy ship or a hydroelectric dam stops working. I've been doing it since I was 39, and that morning I was about to learn that the grandson of the man who built this place had just signed a piece of paper that he thought ended my career. What he didn't know, what nobody on the executive floor knew, was that he'd just lit the fuse on something that was going to cost his family $390 million. And he'd done it 9 days before a payment was supposed to hit my account that would have made the whole thing impossible. Let me back up. The kid's name is Tucker Hale. He's 29. He came in 8 months ago with an MBA from somewhere expensive and a title nobody at the company had ever had before, Chief Transformation Officer, which as far as any of us on the floor could tell meant he walked around with an iPad asking why things cost what they cost and then getting annoyed when you tried to explain. His grandfather, Old Man Royce, started Hartwell in a rented garage in 1971 with one furnace and a handshake deal with the railroad. Royce was the kind of man who knew the first name of every guy who ran a crucible. His grandson couldn't tell you the difference between ductile iron and a donut. That February morning, the security guard, a good kid named Marquis who'd only been there a year and looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him, let me into the lobby and walked me to the third-floor conference room. Tucker was sitting at the head of the table in a charcoal suit, scrolling on his phone. There was a single folder in front of the empty chair across from him. He didn't stand up. He didn't even put the phone down right away. "Walt," he said, "have a seat." I didn't sit. I'd stood in that room for hundreds of meetings, arguing about poor temperatures and rejection rates and whether a client's spec was achievable or whether we were about to scrap $40,000 of metal trying to hit it. I knew that room. He didn't. "You can read it standing if you want," he said, and slid the folder an inch toward me. Inside was one page. Position eliminated. Effective immediately. Signed, Tucker Hale, Chief Transformation Officer. "We're streamlining the operations leadership structure," he said. And I could tell he'd practiced the line in the mirror. "Your role's redundant under the new org chart. HR will be in touch about your final paycheck and COBRA. My role. Director of Foundry Operations, the guy who 12 years ago designed and built the thing that made Hartwell worth buying. We called it the Poor Logic System. It started as a spreadsheet and turned into a piece of software that controlled every furnace, every mold line, every quality checkpoint on the floor, and it ran on a database of 19 years of poor data that doesn't exist anywhere else on Earth. Temperature curves, cooling rates, alloy behavior for 200 specific castings, the exact reasons why batch 4471 cracked in 2009, and how we made sure it never happened again. You cannot buy that. You cannot rebuild it in a quarter. It is the difference between Hartwell winning the contract to cast the rotor housings for the new Great Lakes offshore wind project, and Hartwell being a shop that pours boat cleats. And here was a thing Tucker didn't know, because Tucker had never once read an employment contract older than his own. I signed the page. Didn't say a word. He looked relieved, the way you look when you've been bracing for somebody to yell. And they just nod instead. He had no idea the yelling was going to come from his own side of the building. On my way out, I stopped at my office. They'd already reprogrammed my badge, but I didn't need to get in. Everything that mattered lived on encrypted servers that only opened with my fingerprint and a key that lived in a safe deposit box at a credit union on State Street. I'd built the company's whole digital backbone myself. Back when we were a 60-man shop and IT was me staying late on Thursdays. I built it the way I'd built everything. No single point of failure, except, I suppose, me. I drove home down Route 5 along the lake. February in Erie is its own kind of gray. The sky and the water. The sky and the water. The snow piled brown along the shoulders. I'd made that drive for 19 years. I pulled into the garage, sat there with the engine ticking, and looked at the calendar on my phone. The Mercer Bay project completion bonus, $145,000, was scheduled to clear the following Thursday at end of business. 9 days. Here's why that number mattered. 14 years ago, old man Royce took me to a tavern called the Plymouth on West 8th after we'd spent a Saturday saving a casting run that should have failed. Royce was in his 70s by then, already starting to hand things over to his son-in-law, already worried. He'd watched 2 other Erie manufacturers get bought by holding companies and stripped for parts. The equipment auctioned, the men shown the door. He had a bourbon, and he told me something I never forgot. He said the suits always come eventually, and when they decide the people who built the place cost too much to keep, he wanted the work to survive even if the company didn't. So, he had a lawyer write a clause into my contract. Quiet, clean, buried in an addendum. Nobody would ever read unless they knew to look for it. If I was terminated without cause before any active project bonus was paid out, full ownership of the PoorLogic system, every line of code, every byte of that 19-year database, every patent on the process controls, transferred to me. Not to the company, to me, personally, filed with the state. Notarized. Sitting in that safe deposit box for 14 years, waiting. Royce called it his insurance against stupidity. If they ever fired me to dodge a payment, they'd lose something worth 100 times what they saved. Tucker Hale had just walked into it with his eyes closed. Susan, my wife, was at the kitchen table when I came in, grading the spelling tests she brought home from the 4th grade class she'd taught at the same elementary school for 22 years. She looked up and read my face in about a second and a half. 29 years of marriage will do that. The grandson, she said. Not a question. The grandson. She put her pen down. Our daughter was already at her shift. She's an RN at St. Vincent, and the house was quiet except for the furnace kicking on. Susan got up and poured me a cup from the pot she'd made, and I told her all of it. The folder, the redundant roll, and then I told her about the clause, and her face did this slow thing where the anger drained out and something sharper took its place. So if they don't pay the bonus, she said slowly, you own the software. Automatically. 9 days. And without it, the Mercer Bay contract can't run. The whole bid was built on PoorLogic. They can't pour the rotor housings to spec without it. And the buyout? I rubbed my eyes. There's a company out of Charlotte, Kestrel Industrial, that's been circling for a year. $390 million. They're paying that number for one reason. They think they're buying the most advanced casting control system in the country. Without it, they're paying $390 million for a building and a parking lot. Susan sat back down. She'd spent 22 years dealing with school administrators and budget cuts and parents who wanted to argue about everything, and I watched her switch into the mode I'd learned not to interrupt. Walt, she said, you need to be smart about this. Not mad. Smart. I looked at the clock on the stove. 214 hours, give or take. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop. 2 reporters from the Erie Times News. A number I didn't know that turned out to be a recruiter who'd somehow already heard, and then a text from Hector Ramos, the best young metallurgist I had, a kid I'd been mentoring for 7 years since he came out of Penn State Barrand with a degree and no connections and a chip on his shoulder. His dad ran a tire shop on Buffalo Road. Hector had the kind of work ethic where he'd run a casting analysis 4 times and then stay late to run it a 5th. His text said, they've got consultants in the server room. Can't get past your locks. Hale is losing it. I called him. How bad? I said. He brought in a firm from Boston. They told him they can replicate PoorLogic in 3 weeks. Hector almost laughed saying it. 3 weeks, Walt. I told him the system's trained on 19 years of our pour data, and you can't rebuild that any more than you can unpour a casting. He didn't want to hear it. What'd you tell the Boston guys? The truth. That is not just software. It's the record of every mistake this company ever made and every fix we ever found. That's not in any manual. That lives in the database and in your head. Good answer, I said. Hector, listen to me. Whatever happens this week, you've got a future in this trade. Don't let anybody make you think otherwise. A pause. Should I be worried about Mercer Bay? There's 240 people on that contract. I know exactly how many people are on it, I said. That's why I need you to trust me. After we hung up, I sat in my home office and I'll be honest, the worker thing was the part that ate at me. Because I could fix it. 1 phone call, 1 fingerprint, and the locks open and the floor runs and nobody loses a paycheck. I sat there a long time. Then I wrote an email to Eleanor Voss, the longest-serving member of the Hartwell board, a metallurgist herself before she moved up. One of the maybe 3 people in that building who actually understood what poor logic was and why it mattered. I kept it short. I told her she was probably hearing about access problems on the floor, that my departure triggered certain contractual obligations regarding intellectual property, and that if the board wanted to talk before Thursday's deadline, I was available, but not through Tucker. I sent it and watched the screen. She replied at 11:40 that night. 3 lines. Emergency board call tomorrow. Royce's son-in-law knows. Tucker does not. Stand by. Thursday morning, 8 days out. The phone rang at exactly 8 o'clock. A man named David Okafor, the procurement director for the Great Lakes Offshore Wind Authority, the public-private outfit that had awarded Hartwell the Mercer Bay rotor contract. His voice was very flat and very careful. Mr. Brennick, our engineering oversight team ran a routine verification on the Mercer Bay casting control systems yesterday and got access denied errors across the entire PoorLogic platform. I'd like to understand what's happening at your company. It's not my company anymore, Mr. Okafor, as of Tuesday morning. There was a silence on the line that went on a little too long. Mr. Brennick, he said, this is a public infrastructure project with federal cost-share dollars attached. If the certified control systems for these castings are unavailable, I'm looking at a stop work order, penalty clauses, and a structural review of every part already poured. That's 240 people sent home and a delay that runs into the tens of millions. I understand. You'll need to talk to Hartwell's current leadership about technical access. We tried. They can't provide the certifications. He paused. I'll be plain with you. If we can't verify these systems inside 72 hours, I'm obligated to halt the work. And underneath what he was saying, I could hear the other thing he wasn't saying, which was that the Wind Authority would be very interested in whoever ended up actually owning that platform. I'd start with the board, I told him. Ask for Eleanor Voss. She'll understand the technical side better than anyone in that building right now. I hung up and I thought about the men and women on that contract, the molders and the crane operators and the grinders who clocked in at 5 in the morning in the dark, and the cold to make things that would outlast every one of us out in Lake Erie, spinning in the wind. They didn't deserve to lose a paycheck because a 29-year-old wanted a line on his transformation slide deck. Susan found me at the table. You're thinking about the floor guys, she said. 240 of them. You didn't stop that work, Walt. Tucker did. The second he fired the only person who could run the thing. She sat. And if you pick up the phone and fix it right now, what happens? He learns nothing. The next director he decides is too expensive gets the exact same envelope, and the clause Royce spent 14 years protecting becomes a piece of paper that meant nothing. She was right. Being right didn't make the next week shorter. By Thursday noon, the Erie Times-News ran a piece about leadership disruption at Hartwell affecting the Mercer Bay project. By 2, it had been picked up by an industry trade site. By the close of the market, Kestrel Industrial Stock had slipped on a report that its flagship acquisition was wobbling. And then my phone rang, and the screen said the one name I half expected. Roland Hale. The CEO. Royce's son-in-law, Tucker's uncle by marriage. The man who'd run the company decently for the 11 years since Royce stepped back, right up until the day he decided that blood was the same thing as judgment. Walt. His voice sounded like he'd been awake for 3 days. I owe you an apology. You do. Tucker acted without board sign-off. I didn't know about the termination until Eleanor called me last night. I've been in meetings since 4 a.m. trying to understand the size of what he did. And it's bad. Kestrel is asking questions we can't answer. The Wind Authority is threatening a stop work order. Our insurer wants to know if we even have valid licensing on our own control platform. He stopped. Walt? Royce's clause. Eleanor showed me the filing. I never knew it existed. Royce didn't want you to know. He wanted it to work when it had to, not get bargained away when it was inconvenient. A long quiet. What do you want? I looked at the countdown on my screen. Just under 31 hours. I want a conversation, I said, but not until after Thursday at 5. Walt, if we wait that long, then you better hope your Boston consultants are as good as Tucker thinks they are. The next afternoon, Eleanor Voss called me herself. The board had met again. Tucker had been removed from his position. Roland had abstained, but everyone else voted to do it, and they made it unanimous around him. "That's a start," I said. "There's more. We'd like to bring you back as a consultant. Full restoration of your system access. $2,500 a day through the Mercer Bay completion, plus your original bonus. Eleanor, by Thursday at 5, I own Poor Logic outright. You know that. I do. Which is why I'm asking you to think about what Royce would want. He built this place to make things that mattered, to keep good jobs in this town. If that system leaves Hartwell, Mercer Bay collapses and 240 people are out of work, never mind every other contract running on the platform." She knew exactly where to put the knife. That's why I respected her. "I'll think about it," I said. "But I want to be in the room Thursday, and I want Hector Ramos in there too. The young metallurgist. Why? Because he's the future of this company. He ought to be at the table when you decide what that future looks like. Now, here's the part the people who say I should have taken the money never understand, because Kestrel's people came to me too. That Friday night, an email landed from a senior VP at Kestrel Industrial, going around Hartwell entirely. They'd licensed Poor Logic from me directly once I owned it. Their number was $12 million over a 4-year consulting deal. I showed Susan. She read it twice. "That's never work again money," she said quietly. "It's not, though. I've been turning it over all day. Read the rest of it. The deal's got a non-compete and an exclusivity clause that hands them the right to relicense it to anyone, including back to Hartwell at whatever price they want. They're not buying my work. They're buying the leash. $12 million for me to hand the whole town's future to a holding company in Charlotte that'll move the casting work south the first quarter they can. I've seen exactly that movie twice in this county. I know how it ends." Susan looked at me for a long moment. "So the $12 million isn't the smart play. The smart play is the one where the work stays here, and I'm not the only thing standing between 240 people and a layoff. Royce didn't write that clause so I could cash out and disappear. He wrote it so the work would be protected. There's a difference, and it took me about a day to remember it." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "Okay," she said. "Then let's go protect it." Thursday morning, I walked into the Hartwell lobby wearing a visitor's badge with my own name spelled wrong on it. Brennick, 1 N short, 19 years, and they couldn't get the printer right. Donna at the front desk looked me straight in the eye this time. "Welcome back, Mr. Brennick," she said, and she got it right out loud, even if the badge didn't. The big conference room was full. Eleanor Voss at the head of the table, Roland Hale looking like he'd aged a decade in 9 days. 2 other board members. Kestrel had sent a VP up from Charlotte and a lawyer who hadn't taken his suit jacket off, and in the corner, in a sport coat I'd never seen him wear, looking like he wanted to be invisible and important at the same time, sat Hector Ramos. Eleanor opened it. "Walt, thank you for coming. Let me state the situation plainly. As of 5 o'clock today, if Walt's completion bonus is not paid, full ownership of the Poor Logic platform transfers to him under a clause our founder wrote 14 years ago. Without that platform, our Mercer Bay contract is in jeopardy. The Kestrel acquisition is finished, and this company's future is genuinely uncertain." Roland spoke next. He looked at me when he did it, which I'll give him credit for. "Before anything else, I want to say something about Tucker. What he did was arrogant and short-sighted, and it disrespected everything you've given this company. I brought him in because he's family and I thought I could teach him the business. I was wrong. He wasn't ready, and I should have seen it." I nodded. I didn't pile on. I made plenty of dumb calls when I was 29. The difference was, mine never put 240 paychecks on the table. I looked at the clock on the wall. 9:06. Just under 8 hours. "Here's what I want," I said. I'd organized it on the drive, and the way I organize a pour, step by step, checking each one for where it could crack. First, Hector Ramos gets promoted to Director of Foundry Operations. Full authority over Poor Logic going forward. He reports to the board, not to whatever transformation officer you hire next. I've spent 7 years training him. He knows that platform better than anyone alive except me, and inside 2 years he'll know it better than I do. Eleanor looked at Hector. Hector looked at me. I gave him a small nod. Done, Eleanor said. Second, Hartwell builds a real succession protocol. No critical system in this company ever rides on one person again. You document everything, you cross-train, you build redundancy into your people, the same way I build it into a casting. The fact that one fired man could freeze this whole company is a failure of management, not a feature. Roland nodded slowly. That's fair. It's overdue. Third, my bonus pays today, all $145,000. I earned it. Of course, Eleanor said. Fourth, I'll consult through the Mercer Bay completion and the Kestrel transition. 6 months, part-time, $200 an hour. After that I'm done. For real. No emergency calls. No, just one more thing on a Sunday. And poor logic? Roland asked, and the whole room went still. Because that was the $390 million question. I looked at the clock. I had until 5 to decide, and I'd already decided in my kitchen the night before, but I wanted him to sit in it for a second. Poor logic stays with Hartwell, I said. I'll sign a licensing agreement that keeps full rights here, for every current and future contract, but I'm adding a condition, and it goes in writing today. Call it Royce's Clause, Part 2. If this company ever terminates a senior technical employee without cause inside 12 months of a major contract deadline, that employee automatically receives co-ownership of any system they helped build. You want to cut someone to save a buck right before their payday? Fine. But you'll do the math on what it costs you first. The Kestrel lawyer's pen stopped moving. The VP next to him was staring at the table. Roland let out a breath he'd probably been holding since Tuesday. That's a hell of a condition, Walt, he said. It's the one Royce would have written if he'd thought of it. I'm just finishing the job. Eleanor was openly fighting a smile now. All in favor? 4 hands went up. Roland hesitated, then raised his. Unanimous. My phone buzzed around 10. Not the bonus. That came later in the day. It was a number I hadn't seen in 2 years, a Florida area code. Royce. 81 years old, retired down to a place outside Sarasota where his daughter sent me a Christmas card every year. Eleanor told me everything, it said. Proud of you, Walter. Knew that clause would earn its keep one day. Don't let them forget what the work is for. I typed back, never have, never will. At 5 o'clock sharp, my phone lit up with a bank alert. $145,000 deposited. The clause stayed asleep. Poor logic stayed in Erie, under terms that would protect the next guy who got handed a folder and the one after him. Hector caught me in the lobby as I was turning in the badge with my misspelled name. Mr. Brennick. I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything. Just do the work. Take care of the people who do it next to you. And read every contract they ever put in front of you, especially the part in the back that nobody reads. He laughed, then got serious in a way that made him look about 10 years older. Thank you, my folks. This is going to mean everything to them. I shook his hand. That meant more than the money, and the money was real. Susan and I sat at our kitchen table that night with sandwiches from a place on Peach Street and a couple bottles of a local lager that's brewed about a mile from the foundry. The house was warm. Our daughter had called from the hospital to say she picked up an extra shift, but she was proud of her dad, which got me a little, I'll admit it. So, Susan said, around a bite, how's it feel? I thought about it for a second. Lighter, I said, like I set down a bag I'd been carrying so long I forgot it was on my back. Good lighter, the best kind. The kind where you remember your shoulders used to feel like something before you spent 20 years holding up a building that was never going to thank you for it. She reached across and squeezed my hand. Out the window, the snow had finally stopped, and the sky over the lake was breaking up the way it does in Erie, when the wind swings around to the north, the clouds tearing open, and a couple of hard, stubborn stars showing through that the city lights couldn't quite kill. My phone buzzed one more time. Hector. First thing tomorrow, I'm reading every contract in the building, front to back, the fine print twice. I turned the phone face down on the table. He didn't need an answer from me. He already knew exactly what to do. Some things, it turns out, are worth more than a $390 million deal, or corner office, or 19 years spent proving yourself to people who never once looked up from their phones. Some things are worth fighting for. The trick, the thing it took me 58 years and one cold February morning to finally understand, is knowing the exact moment to stop fighting and go home and start living. The countdown was done. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I wasn't counting anything at all. That cold morning in the loading dock, staring at a red light over a door I'd walked through 4,000 times, I didn't know yet that the worst thing that ever happened to me at Hartwell would turn into the freest I'd ever felt. But looking back now, the whole thing makes a kind of plain sense. Causes have effects. Tucker Hale chose to save a buck on a man he'd never bothered to understand, and that one choice rolled downhill and nearly buried a company his grandfather built with his bare hands. Every part of what came after was just the bill coming due for a decision made by someone who never read past the first page. What saved me wasn't luck. It was three things I'd been quietly building my whole life without ever calling them by name. The first was just doing right by people, even when nobody was watching. For 7 years, I poured what I knew into Hector Ramos because it was the right thing to do, not because I expected a return. And when the room finally mattered, he was ready to stand in it. Old Roy stood the same from me 14 years earlier when he wrote that clause, protecting a man he'd be long gone before it ever helped. Decency, it turns out, compounds quietly. Like interest, you forget you're earning. The second thing was learning to think before I felt. When that $12 million offer from Kestrel landed, every nerve in my body wanted to grab it and walk. But I taught myself, over a lot of hard years on that floor, to read the whole contract, to look for the crack before the pour, to ask what a thing really costs and not just what it pays. The smart move wasn't the loud one. It almost never is. Slowing down long enough to see the leash hidden inside the gift is what kept me from handing my whole town to a holding company in Charlotte. And the third was simply not folding. 9 days of silence while the phone screamed at me. 9 days of knowing one fingerprint could end it and choosing to hold the line because folding would have made Royce's clause meaningless and taught Tucker nothing. Standing still when everything in you wants to move is its own kind of strength, and I'm not sure I had it at 30. I had it at 58 because life had beaten it into me. If you take anything from what happened to me, let it be this. Be the kind of person who keeps their word when it's inconvenient. The kind who thinks 2 moves past the easy one, and the kind who can stand in a hard place without running. Those 3 things won't make you rich overnight. But they'll mean that when your cold February morning comes, and it will, you'll be ready to walk through it and come out the other side still yourself. The countdown ended. I stopped counting, and for the first time in 20 years, my shoulders were my own.